Hello, my name is Ginnie Cover. I'm a past board member with AXYS. I've also been with the organization since it was KSNA, which was a very long time ago in the 1990s. I'm the parent of a 35-year-old man with XXY who was diagnosed prenatally. I'm also a social worker, and I spent a great deal of my career working with adults who had developmental disabilities, especially a number who are high functioning, as people with SCA tend to be if they have any disability. I wrote the guidebook, Living with Klinefelter Syndrome, Trisomy X, and 47XXY. One of my areas that I particularly like to talk about are government benefits and how they might be applicable to people who have extra X and Y chromosomes. And I often start talking with parents who have children who are in high school, and their child is transitioning to adulthood, and they're wondering whether or not there are any benefits that might apply to their children. Transition to adulthood is the process of acquiring skills and knowledge to take on adult responsibilities. 18 is also when the legal status for a child changes from parental responsibility for all medical and educational and financial choices to individual responsibility. It's where the person becomes legally an adult. Individuals who've got X and Y chromosome variations, we happen to know can often be delayed in developing the maturity and skills that are needed for them successfully to transition to adulthood. So one of the things that I talk with families about is the fact that you may need additional assistance in order to get established in a career or to train for a career. Young people may also need assistance in the form of income support. And so that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about. Another change that happens when you go from the school system to the secondary school system or post-secondary school is that you move from being covered from the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is IDEA, to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is ADA. Under IDEA, a child is guaranteed that they're supposed to get an education. And it is generally the state's, the government's responsibility to make sure that that child gets an education. When you become an adult and you move so that all of your services are under the ADA, they're not guaranteed anymore. The family, the young adult, sometimes the older adult, is going to have to self-identify as having a medical condition that may affect their ability to support themselves or to gain an education, and you have to apply for services. So they are no longer guaranteed. So this presentation is going to focus on several things. The first is vocational rehabilitation services. Almost all individuals who have extra X and Y chromosomes will qualify for vocational rehab services. These are government-funded services that are funded under both the federal and the state education acts. And that's where the funding comes from, so it's not associated with a particular type of disability. I'm also going to talk about maintaining eligibility for services such as supplemental security income, which covers some people with X and Y chromosome variations, as well as Medicaid, which will fund a number of services in addition to medical care that a number of people with X and Y chromosomes are going to qualify for. I'll also talk about applying for SSI, which is Supplemental Security Income, or SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Income Support. Now, a number of people said that they're very concerned that they won't qualify for any of this income support because they are not, quote, disabled enough, unquote. That's probably not true. I think that our surveys have indicated that about a third of all individuals who have extra X and Y chromosomes will qualify at some point in their lives for either SSI or SSDI. That said, they're very difficult to get. There are other programs that can assist when a young person is not yet able to support themselves, or if someone finds that they continue to be low income even though they're working, they can get programs like SNAP, which is the supplemental nutrition. It replaces the old food stamps. They can get Medicaid in the many states who have expanded Medicaid. There are still, I believe, 11 states that have not. You can get housing assistance if you're very lucky and if you are tenacious and willing to be on a waiting list for a number of years. And you can also get a lot of information about these various benefits from what are called independent living centers. So I'm going to talk about these things in the presentation. Now, the special concerns for individuals who have extra X and Y chromosomes is that there's a tendency for developmental delay. It's not necessarily developmental disability. It's just that we know from research that it takes people longer to get themselves established in a career and to be able to become self-supporting. So the services that many states offer for people who have developmental disabilities are not necessarily appropriate for those with X and Y chromosome variations, because SCA tends to be high functioning, and the services that are maintained by many states are geared to much lower functioning people. Another one of the concerns is that most agencies don't know anything about X and Y variations. They have to go to Google, and then they may or may not find accurate information. So if you're an adult trying to get services for yourself, or you're a parent concerned with services for your child, it's going to be up to you to provide any agency that you're applying for with accurate and really comprehensive information. So it's going to be your responsibility to educate those who are going to process your applications. If you're a parent, you really need to educate yourself on the legal, financial, medical, and educational issues. That's really beyond what I'm talking about. What you need to do is to think about your own child's individual circumstances, whether they have severe learning disabilities, no learning disabilities at all, if they've got other disorders such as seizure disorder or autism spectrum disorder that is going to make it more difficult to become established in a career. And you also have to make sure that there's transition planning that's taking place in your child's school program, whether it's an IEP or a 504 plan. And again, you have to, I'll emphasize that you have to educate the service agencies about X and Y variations. If you're an adult, you may need assistance in accessing your own strength and any functioning deficits that you have. You can use trusted family members and friends. You can often have a discussion with a therapist about what you may need to do in order to become successful in a career and in adult life. There are special needs life coaches, particularly those who work with individuals with ADHD or individuals who have a high functioning type of disability, such as Asperger's syndrome. You can also work with agencies that contract with vocational rehab services. And you can have that sort of a conversation with the independent living centers. And there are always in every state a number of different centers where you can talk with benefits counselors. Now, one of the things that you want to do is, even if someone is 18 and you really don't know how well they're going to be able to transition into adulthood, is understand that you can't necessarily predict how the variation is going to affect maturity. You also need to realize that transition to independence may vary. It may not, your child may never become self-supporting. So you want to hope for the best, because most individuals with SCA do, in fact, attain quite a bit of independence, but you want to plan for a delay in any possible limitations. And as I said before, 1/3 of adults with X and Y variations qualify for SSI or SSDI at some point during their lives. But you want to make sure that you keep them eligible, and so there are some financial things that you need to do. There are if your child has money that either you're saving for them or that they have received from a grandparent or from an inheritance, you want to be able to put those funds into what's called an ABLE account or into a supplemental needs trust. This allows you to maintain eligibility for SSI and or Medicaid. Generally, what you need to do is to make sure that your child, or if you're an adult, that you yourself have less than $2,000 in your own name if you're going to be applying for Medicaid or if you're going to be applying for SSI. Now, a trust will allow a parent or another relative or trusted person to have some control over the funds in case of immaturity, whereas an ABLE account is self-managed by the individual who has the disability. If in fact you set up one of these accounts, either an ABLE account or a supplemental needs trust, you need to make sure that the family will has been changed, that you change the beneficiary of any insurance policy or any other documents. Because if someone, for instance, grandparent should pass away, and your child is covered by Medicaid, and the child suddenly comes into $30,000, they will lose eligibility for Medicaid until such time as those funds can be put into another trust, which allows them to remain eligible for Medicaid. So I generally recommend that if you're going to do this, that you establish the trust by age 15, but it's certainly not too late if an individual is 18 or older. And in fact, a person who is, say, 24 and working, but continues to have either health or other concerns, and they believe that they're going to want to go on to Medicaid, you can put funds into an ABLE account and you'll be able to shelter them if you need to use government services in the future. ABLE accounts are the easiest and they're the least expensive to set up by the individual. There are also limitations on the amount that you can deposit into an ABLE account. So if you have quite a bit of funding, you're going to want to look at a trust rather than just an ABLE account. The least expensive trusts to set up are pooled trusts. In fact, you don't have to set it up. They are trusts that are maintained by nonprofit agencies, and they allow people to participate in the trust without all the expenses of setting up an individual standalone trust. A will can also be written to automatically establish a trust on either the death of a parent or the death of a grandparent. So if you don't have any funding for a child's trust, you can simply have your attorney write it into the will, and that way, at such point as you pass on, a trust will automatically be created, and therefore you're not going to have to worry about leaving too much money to a young person who's dependent on government benefits. These trusts have to be written by an attorney who's an expert in both SSI and Medicaid requirements. It's not a matter to give to your roommate from college or your sister-in-law, the attorney, because they have to be written in a specialized manner or the person will lose eligibility. The other thing it's important to do is that you get benefits based on having a comprehensive medical and educational document. And it needs to mention the genetic diagnosis. It needs to mention the fact that this disability is a lifelong, that the child or was born with it. It has to be clear about learning disabilities and about any medical and psychiatric conditions. Because when you are applying for benefits, you're going to be putting together an application. You won't, for the most part, have an opportunity to speak to the person who's doing the determination of disability. And so it will all rely on the written record that you provide. So well before you need to do an application, organize all of this information into a file or a notebook. Because these records are going to be required for any type of accommodation that you need at work, for any accommodation in college, for eligibility for any vocational programs, or for application for SSI or SSDI. Adults should also have complete copies of their educational and medical records. So whatever the parent has in terms of documentation should be turned over to an adult as well. Clear records are the key to obtaining any benefits. And you may not wish, for instance, to have other people know about a psychiatric hospitalization or a seizure disorder. But if you don't put this into the record, you're not going to get the type of services that you're applying for. If there are no records that exist for childhood for an adult, then the best thing to do is to have a comprehensive neuropsych evaluation and a well-written medical history that establishes what the impact of the genetic condition is on health, education, and vocational achievement. Generally, records should be no more than 18 months old. I tell people that the best records that you can get are probably from one of the AXYS clinics. It's worth traveling there. There are some that will see adults who are over 21 or 26, and it certainly is worth traveling to one of those clinics and getting a comprehensive evaluation. For vocational training, I tell parents that one of the best things that you can do is to make sure that your child has either a job or volunteer experience before 18. If you're an adult and you're in college, make sure that you've got either paid work or volunteer experience where you'll be able to have someone give you an evaluation, a letter of recommendation. The type of job isn't as important as acquiring what are called workforce behaviors, or they're known as soft skills. Even if an individual is college bound, a young person is college bound, he may still be eligible for training or placement or job coaching services during or after school or in college. There are actually a number of young people who can get services from vocational rehab networks in their state, and some of them will also provide scholarship money for college or for a vocational training program. The You can access vocational rehab services at any point in the future, up through age 65. I believe that they do not take anyone who is over 65. If you want to know where your vocational rehab services are, put that into Google along with your state, and it will tell you how they're organized and where the offices are. You can also go to independent living centers, and these are offices that are federally funded. There are generally several in every state. If you go to this particular website, you'll get a directory. And these are excellent offices to sit down and talk about what sorts of vocational programs you might get and what other income or funding support you might be eligible for. They were set up originally for people with physical disabilities, but they now serve many people who also have social skills disabilities, like those with Asperger's syndrome and those with seizure disorders. You simply go in, you educate the Independent Living Center about the X and Y chromosome variation and how it has affected your child's life or your own life, and they will do their best to counsel you on what services you can apply for and how you do it. All states have centers that provide vocational testing and assessment. They will also pay for vocational training, including college. They may provide medical and therapeutic services. For instance, if you find that a seizure disorder is not being addressed appropriately, they may send you to another neurologist to see if there are other things that can be done, such as nerve stimulators or brain surgery, which I actually had several clients with Klinefelter syndrome who had refractory seizure disorders, and they were referred successfully by Voc Rehab to a surgeon at Yale University who was able to make them seizure-free. The Voc rehab agencies also will work at job development after they've done an assessment of abilities, and they can provide job coaches to help someone adjust in the workplace. One of the most important things that a Voc Rehab agency can do is to help you advocate for any workplace accommodations. For instance, for low muscle tone, for difficulty standing, they can advocate for doing your work sitting on a stool, for instance. Now, applying for vocational services is going to be the normal challenge, because they're going to want to try to put you, I'm speaking as if it's an adult, into a pigeonhole. So they're going to ask, well, do you have, a physical disability? Is XYY like Asperger's syndrome? And so again, it would be a matter of bringing information so that they know how an X and Y variation affects either you or affects your child. Having a good comprehensive neuropsych evaluation and a medical evaluation with the various areas of disability is quite helpful. They're going to want to see your most recent IEP or 504 evaluation if you're within between like a year and 7 or 8 years of high school graduation. What you want to do to get Voc Rehab services is that many states have waiting lists, and it depends on the degree of disability. A number of states will only want to serve people who have 2 or 3 disabling conditions. So if you walk in and say, I have ADHD, but otherwise I'm unaffected, you're unlikely to get services in one of these states that has a waiting list. However, what we find with people with SCA is that there are often a number of areas where the person is affected. It can be physical in terms of low muscle tone, perhaps scoliosis, perhaps tremor, hand tremor. There can also be cognitive issues. There may be ADHD. There may be anxiety. So if you've got a nice comprehensive assessment that demonstrates all of the areas, you'll be judged to have disabilities in 2, 3, 4 particular areas. And so you'll be much more likely to be accepted for services. I also talked about independent living centers. There will be a directory of centers in your state. They provide lots of informational and referral services. They also give you benefits advice, and they give you addresses and particular people that they think would be helpful in certain offices. They'll give you assistance with applications for SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, SNAP, housing vouchers. They're often the first people who know of openings in affordable housing complexes. And they often offer life skills training. So in money management, transportation, self-advocacy, and other sorts of areas where someone may find that their life skills are not quite that of their peers. So if you are a parent, know that once a child is 18, their application for SSI will be considered based on their own income and assets, not the parents. So if you believe that your son or daughter is going to may qualify for SSI, don't apply before the age of 18. After 18, the person is considered to be their own household. The SSI and SSDI can provide a certain amount of income support while a young person gets the skills and education to be independent. So it is not unusual for young people with SCA to be covered by SSI through, say, age 27 or 28, at which point in time they begin earning enough money that they no longer qualify. It's also the case that a number of individuals with SCA find that as they age, they have more health problems, and that they may become disabled before retirement age, and that they need to apply for SSDI. So SSI and SSDI are applied for in the same way. It's the same application, but Social Security, which administers both programs, will decide which one you're applicable. If you have an SSI determination of disability, most states automatically make that adult eligible for Medicaid or for SNAP assistance, SNAP being the new term for food stamps. I mentioned for adults 18 and over, again, eligibility is based on the individuals and not the family's earnings and assets. So an individual, again, can't have more than $2,000 in assets in their own name if they're applying for SSI. For adults who are applying for SSDI, that is not means tested. So adults who know that they're going to be eligible for SSDI are not going to have a limitation of assets. But they have to have been disabled for at least 12 months, and they have to be unable to engage in what's called substantial gainful activity. And that's a term that you will see throughout this presentation. The Social Security Administration refers to substantial gainful activity as being able to earn at least $1,470 per month. So any earnings over that amount as of January of 2023 in competitive employment will make you ineligible for either SSI or SSDI. College students aren't excluded just because they're students if they have a condition that a physician or special education personnel believe will prevent them from earning 1470. They may be eligible for SSI or SSDI. There's no means testing for SSDI. That will cover people who have their own work history, or for people who have a disability that was acquired before the age of 22, they can get benefits based on their parents' work history as long as the parent is old enough to have filed for retirement and is receiving Social Security payments at that time. One of the things that I do is tell people to go to ssa.gov. It is a very, very well-written website, and read through that website a number of times, because that will tell you what you need to know about eligibility and whether or not you're likely to be able to get benefits. You can start a case with a phone call to the 800 number that is on the website. There's also a very extensive electronic online survey that you need to take. What you do with this questionnaire, if you're a parent, I know that you like to present your child in the best possible light, but you can't do that on this questionnaire and expect to get benefits. What you need to do is fill it out based on the worst performance day in your child's life. And similarly, for an adult who is filling out this questionnaire, how do you do in terms of day-to-day functioning and functioning at work on your worst day? After your application has been completed, they're going to do either an in-person or an on-the-phone interview, either with the parent, with or without the presence of a young adult, or if the adult is applying for himself, they're going to do it with you. The other thing that you need to know is that any physicians or psychologists that the person has seen in generally the last 3 years is going to be sent a questionnaire, which they have to complete and send back in. And they have to give a judgment to Social Security of whether or not you're able to engage in substantial gainful activity, which is earning $1470 per month. The one thing that you need to know is that there are listed impairments that automatically qualify people for SSI or SSDI. The sex chromosome aneuploidies are not listed impairments. They will not automatically grant eligibility. Instead, the determination is going to try to decide whether or not the extra X and Y chromosome produces comorbid disabilities that are equal to the requirements of any listed impairment. So the documentation that is submitted from doctors as well as from educational institutions has to show in detail physical, developmental, or psychiatric impairment that prevents the individual from this substantial gainful activity. So it can't talk about mild, it can't talk about moderate. If there are psychiatric disabilities, they need to be substantial. It has to be severe depression, it has to be anxiety, psychotic disturbances, anything that resulted in a hospitalization. Just plain ADHD is probably not going to do it unless it's described as severe. Similarly, if there are developmental disabilities, it has to be spelled out that there is intellectual disability, which is an IQ of less than 70, or that the person has something equivalent to autism spectrum disorder. If there are physical disabilities, they have to be described as being substantial. And of course, with SCA, a number of individuals in our community do in fact qualify. Often they qualify because they have not just one area of disability, such as a severe scoliosis. They may also have autism spectrum disorder. They may have had a severe depression, and it may be accompanied by ADHD. So that's 4 areas of disability. But again, any physician who is writing this has to emphasize the kind of additive nature of these disabling conditions. Best thing to do is to get a comprehensive evaluation from one of the ACRC clinics, because they will often describe the X and Y chromosome variation, and they will tie the comorbid conditions to the chromosomal condition. It usually takes 5 to 9 months for determination of disability after all the material is in. I do tell people that 55% of all applications for SSI or SSDI are rejected on the first round. The way that you can help yourself is if you use an advocate or specialized attorney to help you prepare the application or the appeal. That does increase the chances of success by about 30%. If you should be rejected, what you do is to file an appeal within 90 days. You don't start a new case, because then if you are successful, and many people who file an appeal are successful, benefits will go back to the date that you started your case. So it can often take 1.5 years to get through a successful appeal, but the benefits that are paid will go back to the date that you started the original case. If you use an attorney to file an appeal and you're successful, the amount that attorney can earn is limited, and it is generally no more than 1/3 of the back payments that are received. Now, what are the SSI benefits? They vary by state. And the monthly income can range from about $620 to $840. There are some states that supplement benefits. There's also an income incentive for someone who is receiving SSI. You can work, but your income, your SSI payment, will be reduced by approximately half of your earnings. Once you get up to $1,400 per month, the benefits will disappear. For SSDI, it works differently. That's Social Security disability income. The average payment is about $1,483, but for someone who has had applying for benefits based on their own earnings history, if the earnings have been quite low, the payment may only be about $800. If, on the other hand, you're basing the application on a parent's earnings and the parent had a very high income, the person with SSDI could get as much as $2,500 or $2,800. It's also true that someone getting SSDI is able to continue to collect benefits until such time as they are earning $1,470 per month. Once they start earning $1,470 per month, they're allowed to earn that for any 9 months in a 5-year period, and then benefits stop. So if you're on SSDI, you have to carefully manage your earnings so that you don't go under 14 or over $1,470. So you don't exceed $1,470, and you'll be able to continue with SSDI benefits. Of course, there are some people who find that they're ready for full-time work, and the full-time work is going to pay them $3,000 a month, so they just give up SSDI because they can make a great deal more money if they simply work. Again, A lot of people are confused about the difference between SSI and SSDI. SSI is something that people can receive based on a parent's earnings. The child has to have had a disabling condition before the age of 22. Same application process as SSI. Social Security will determine whether someone is eligible for both for SSI or SSDI, and occasionally somebody is eligible for both, but I can't go into that in this. For those who are getting SSI, the recipient usually qualifies for Medicaid immediately. This is simply done by the state or the county. It doesn't mean that if you have private insurance that you drop that private insurance, because the Medicaid is always secondary. It will always be a payer after your private insurance. For those who get SSDI, after 24 months of receiving SSDI, they will qualify for Medicare. Now, if an individual who is getting either of the benefit programs loses SSI or SSDI because of earned incomes, many states will permit that individual to stay on Medicaid. And Social Security also has a program that will allow someone who started earning enough so they're no longer getting SSI to stay on Medicare for a number of years. It's up to 10 years. Because they don't want people staying on the income programs in order to maintain health insurance. So they have programs that will allow you to continue receiving health insurance for quite a while after you've earning enough not to get either SSI or SSDI. There are redeterminations that go with the program. They will have annual reviews. Or at least every 3 years, there will be a review of someone's ability to work or not. There are certain work incentive programs that allow you to buy into Medicaid. And there's also immediate reinstatement for a while if an individual who had been getting SSI or SSDI is laid off or fired. But these programs very much vary by state, so I can't generalize about them. Medicaid coverage, as I mentioned, is always secondary to any private medical insurance. It also will fund certain what are called waiver services, and this is for people who have significant developmental or psychiatric disabilities. Again, these programs are all state-run. The eligibility varies by state, but in general, you are not eligible for these programs if you have an income that exceeds 130% of the federal poverty level. The waiver services are reserved for the people who have the most significant disabilities. So we certainly have in the SCA community a number of people who are getting waiver services. The most common waiver services are developmental disabilities, and it's either they're generally reserved for those who have intellectual disability or for those who have really significant developmental disabilities such as autism spectrum disorder or neurological or seizure disorders or cerebral palsy. Now, these programs are funded through Medicaid. They're not medical, but what they'll pay for are vocational programs, life skills training, and sometimes housing programs. If someone has a significant physical disability, you can also get Medicaid covered personal care assistance. Mental health programs, again, also vary by state. You have to have a substantial disability, and the standard is called severe and persistent. So it can't be just mild depression. The Medicaid waiver programs, again, will pay for medication management service, psychiatric rehabilitation programs, vocational training, and placement, and sometimes for supervised housing. There are other benefits that are available to people just because of having a low income, and a number of members of our community may have a low income sort of through life. So as long as your income is at or below 130% of the federal poverty level, you should be eligible for food stamps, which is also called SNAP. Many states have work requirements, so if you're not actually considered to be disabled, then you have to work a minimum number of hours per week. Oftentimes that's about 10 hours in order to receive food stamps. There are housing assistance programs, but you have to be very tenacious and very lucky to get into one of them. Section 8 vouchers open periodically, and you can apply for one of those vouchers. If you get a Section 8 voucher, you are able to go to find housing, and you will generally not be charged more than 30% of your income level. But there are waiting lists of 3 to 10 years. My son has a Section 8 voucher, and we waited 6 years for it. But it is really a gold mine because he is able to live in his own townhouse in a very nice townhouse community, and he only pays 30% of his income for this housing. A number of states have general assistance programs. They are usually temporary. They will pay you assistance for 3 to 6 months. Some of them will pay assistance for as long as 2 years. But what they are, they generally require that you participate in a vocational training program, or that you work at least 10 hours a week, but they're all locally determined. So you have to go on. The best way to find out about them is to go to one of the independent living centers. I have my contact information here, and I welcome questions after all of these presentations. I usually get a number of questions from adults and from families, and I am happy to answer them.